Hello, young learners. Today, we are going to hear an amazing story. It's about a man named Nelson Mandela. He was a hero who changed his country and the world. Listening to his story will help you learn English easily. So, let's begin. Nelson Mandela was born on July 18, 1918, in a small village called Mvizo, in South Africa. His full name was Ralilila Mandela. In his language, Xhosa, his name means pulling the branch of a tree or troublemaker. Little did anyone know how much he would shake things up in his lifetime. Nelson's father, Gadla Henry Mfakanyiswa, was a chief and an advisor to the Thembu royal family. His mother, Nosekeni Fanny, was a warm and loving woman. Nelson had a happy childhood, playing with his friends and tending to the cattle. He learned important lessons from the elders in his village, who taught him about African history and culture. When Nelson was 9 years old, his father died. This was a sad time for him and his family. After his father's death, Nelson was sent to live with Chief Janjantaba Dalindibo, the acting regent of the Thembu people. The chief and his wife took care of Nelson as if he were their own son. This was a big change for Nelson, but it gave him many new opportunities. Chief Janjantaba sent Nelson to a mission school, where he received a good education. Nelson was curious and eager to learn. He was one of the few boys in his village who could read and write. At school, Nelson was given the name Nelson by a teacher, following the custom of giving African children English names. Nelson worked hard in school and did very well. He loved to read books and learn about history. He was especially interested in stories about heroes who fought for freedom and justice. These stories inspired him and shaped his dreams for the future. Nelson Mandela's early life was full of challenges and changes. But he never lost his curiosity and his desire to learn. These qualities would help him on his journey to becoming a great leader. As Nelson Mandela grew older, he continued to learn and grow. He attended Healdtown, a prestigious boarding school, where he excelled in his studies. Nelson was a bright student who loved to read and learn. He was also very interested in sports and enjoyed playing soccer and running track. After finishing his studies at Healdtown, Nelson went to Fort Hare University, the only university for black students in South Africa at that time. It was here that Nelson began to develop a deeper understanding of the world around him. He learned about the injustices faced by black people in South Africa and began to question the system of apartheid, a system of racial segregation that kept black people separate from white people and denied them many basic rights. At Fort Hare, Nelson met many other young people who shared his passion for justice. He became friends with Oliver Tambo, who would later become a close ally in the fight against apartheid. Together, they talked about their dreams for a better future and the changes they wanted to see in their country. Nelson's time at Fort Hare was a turning point in his life. He became involved in student politics and was elected to the Student Representative Council. He used his position to speak out against the unfair treatment of black students. However, his activism led to his expulsion from the university. After leaving Fort Hare, Nelson returned to his village. But he knew that he wanted to do more to fight for justice. He moved to Johannesburg, the largest city in South Africa, to continue his education and find work. In Johannesburg, Nelson faced many challenges. He struggled to find a job and lived in poverty. But he never gave up. He continued to educate himself and became involved in the political struggles of his time. In Johannesburg, Nelson met many influential people who shaped his thinking and inspired him to take action. He worked as a clerk in a law firm and took night classes to complete his degree. He also joined the African National Congress, ANC, a political organization dedicated to fighting for the rights of black South Africans. Nelson Mandela's youth and early influences were crucial in shaping his beliefs and his determination to fight for justice. His experiences at Fort Hare and in Johannesburg opened his eyes to the injustices faced by his people and inspired him to take action. Nelson Mandela's involvement in politics began to grow as he became more active in the African National Congress, ANC. The ANC was committed to fighting for the rights of black South Africans and ending the system of apartheid. Nelson was determined to be a part of this struggle. In the early 1940s, Nelson and his friends, including Oliver Tambo and Walter Sisulu, formed the ANC Youth League. The Youth League aimed to energize the ANC and bring in new members. They believed that young people could play a vital role in the fight for freedom. Nelson quickly became a prominent figure in the ANC. He was known for his passion and dedication. He traveled around the country, organizing meetings and rallies. He spoke to people about the importance of unity and the need to stand up against apartheid. In 1948, the National Party came to power in South Africa and implemented a series of harsh apartheid laws. These laws enforced racial segregation and denied black people basic rights. Nelson and the ANC were outraged by these injustices. They organized protests and strikes to oppose the apartheid laws. Nelson's activism brought him into conflict with the authorities. He was arrested several times and faced many dangers. But he never gave up. He believed that fighting for justice was worth any risk. He inspired many others to join the struggle. In 1952, Nelson and Oliver Tambo opened the first black law firm in South Africa. They provided legal aid to black South Africans who were oppressed by apartheid laws. This work was very important, as it gave people hope and support in their fight for justice. Nelson also played a key role in the Defiance Campaign, a series of non-violent protests against apartheid laws. The campaign involved acts of civil disobedience, such as refusing to carry passbooks that restricted the movement of black people. Thousands of people participated, and the campaign drew international attention to the injustices in South Africa. Despite the risks, Nelson continued to fight for freedom. He traveled to other African countries to seek support for the anti-apartheid movement. He met with leaders and shared his vision for a free and democratic South Africa. Nelson Mandela's involvement in politics was driven by his deep commitment to justice and equality. His passion and dedication inspired many others to join the fight against apartheid. He believed that through unity and determination, they could achieve their goals. The fight against apartheid was a long and difficult struggle. Nelson Mandela and his fellow activists faced many challenges, but they were determined to continue their fight for justice. In the 1950s and 1960s, the apartheid regime became even more oppressive. The government passed laws that further restricted the rights of black South Africans. People were forced to live in separate areas, use separate facilities, and attend separate schools. The situation was unbearable for many black South Africans. Nelson Mandela and the ANC knew that they had to take stronger action. They decided to shift their tactics from non-violent protest to armed resistance. In 1961, Nelson co-founded Umkhonto we Sizwe, which means Spear of the Nation in Zulu. This organization aimed to sabotage government installations and disrupt the apartheid system. Nelson and his comrades carried out acts of sabotage against government targets. They hoped to force the government to negotiate and end apartheid. The risks were high, but they believed that it was necessary to achieve their goals. In 1962, Nelson traveled abroad to seek support for the anti-apartheid movement. He visited other African countries and Europe, meeting with leaders and speaking about the injustices in South Africa. He also received military training in Algeria, hoping to strengthen the fight against apartheid. When Nelson returned to South Africa, he was arrested and charged with leaving the country illegally and inciting workers to strike. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, his troubles were far from over. In 1963, the police raided a secret ANC hideout in Rivonia, a suburb of Johannesburg. They found documents that linked Nelson and other ANC leaders to acts of sabotage. Nelson and his comrades were put on trial in what became known as the Rivonia trial. The Rivonia trial was a turning point in Nelson's life. He knew that he could face the death penalty, but he remained steadfast. In his defense speech, he spoke about his commitment to justice and equality. He declared that he was prepared to die for his beliefs. Nelson and his co-accused were found guilty of sabotage and sentenced to life imprisonment. They were sent to Robben Island, a prison off the coast of Cape Town. This marked the beginning of a long and difficult period in Nelson's life, but he remained determined to continue the fight for freedom. The fight against apartheid was filled with challenges and dangers. Nelson Mandela and his fellow activists faced imprisonment and persecution, but they never gave up. Their unwavering commitment to justice and equality inspired many others to join the struggle. Nelson Mandela's arrest and the Rivonia trial were significant events in his life and the anti-apartheid movement. In 1962, Nelson was arrested for leaving the country illegally and inciting workers to strike. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. However, his journey through the legal system did not end there. In 1963, the police raided a secret ANC hideout in Rivonia, a suburb of Johannesburg. They found documents that linked Nelson Mandela and other ANC leaders to acts of sabotage against the apartheid government. This led to Nelson and his comrades being put on trial in what became known as the Rivonia trial. The Rivonia trial was a highly publicized event. Nelson and the other accused were charged with sabotage and conspiracy to overthrow the government. They faced the death penalty if found guilty. Despite the grave consequences, Nelson remained steadfast and courageous. During the trial, Nelson gave a powerful speech from the dock. He spoke about his commitment to fighting for justice and equality for all South Africans. His words resonated with people around the world. He said, "I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die." Nelson's speech was a defining moment. It showcased his unwavering dedication to the cause and his willingness to sacrifice everything for the freedom of his people. His words inspired many and brought global attention to the plight of Black South Africans under apartheid. In 1964, Nelson and his co-accused were found guilty and sentenced to life imprisonment. They were sent to Robben Island, a maximum security prison off the coast of Cape Town. This marked the beginning of a long and challenging period of Nelson's life. Nelson Mandela's time in prison was filled with hardships, but it also became a period of growth and reflection. He was imprisoned on Robben Island for 18 of the 27 years he spent behind bars. The conditions were harsh, and the prisoners were subjected to hard labor, poor food, and inadequate medical care. Despite these difficult conditions, Nelson remained resilient. He continued to fight for justice even from behind bars. He became a symbol of resistance and hope for the oppressed people of South Africa. On Robben Island, Nelson and his fellow prisoners faced many challenges. They were forced to work in a lime quarry, where the bright glare from the sun and the dust caused permanent damage to Nelson's eyesight. The prisoners were also subjected to isolation and harsh treatment by the prison guards. Despite these hardships, Nelson and his comrades found ways to keep their spirits high. They formed a close-knit community, supporting and encouraging each other. They also continued their education, reading books and discussing political ideas. Nelson even managed to complete a law degree through correspondence courses. Nelson's leadership qualities shone even in prison. He organized the prisoners and fought for better living conditions. He negotiated with the prison authorities, demanding fair treatment and improved conditions for all prisoners. His efforts brought some positive changes, such as improved food and medical care. Throughout his time in prison, Nelson never lost hope. He believed that one day, South Africa would be free from apartheid. He wrote letters to his family, friends, and supporters, maintaining his connection with the outside world. His resilience and determination inspired many people around the world to continue the fight against apartheid. Nelson Mandela's time in prison was a testament to his unwavering commitment to justice and equality. Despite the harsh conditions, he remained a beacon of hope and inspiration. His strength and courage inspired a global movement to end apartheid. As Nelson Mandela languished in prison, the world began to take notice of his plight and the injustices of apartheid. International support for Nelson and the anti-apartheid movement grew, leading to campaigns for his release. Many countries and organizations around the world condemned the apartheid regime in South Africa. They called for economic sanctions and boycotts to pressure the South African government to end its discriminatory policies. The global community recognized the need for change and rallied behind the cause of justice and equality. One of the most influential campaigns was the Free Nelson Mandela campaign. Activists around the world demanded Nelson's release and an end to apartheid. Protests, rallies, and concerts were organized to raise awareness and support for the cause. Songs like Free Nelson Mandela by the Specials became anthems for the movement. Prominent leaders and celebrities also joined the campaign. People like Martin Luther King Jr., Bishop Desmond Tutu, and Harry Belafonte spoke out against apartheid and called for Nelson's release. Their voices added weight to the growing pressure on the South African government. In 1988, a massive concert was held at Wembley Stadium in London to celebrate Nelson Mandela's 70th birthday. The concert was broadcast to millions of people around the world. It featured performances by famous musicians and speeches by influential figures, all calling for Nelson's release. The event was a powerful demonstration of global solidarity with the anti-apartheid movement. The international pressure began to have an impact. Economic sanctions and boycotts hurt the South African economy. The government faced increasing isolation and condemnation from the global community. The calls for Nelson's release and an end to apartheid could no longer be ignored. The global support for Nelson Mandela and the anti-apartheid movement played a crucial role in bringing about change. It showed that the fight for justice and equality could unite people from all corners of the world. The relentless efforts of activists, leaders, and ordinary citizens helped create the momentum needed to challenge the apartheid regime. On February 11, 1990, after 27 years of imprisonment, Nelson Mandela was finally released from prison. His release marked a historic moment in the struggle against apartheid and the beginning of a new chapter for South Africa. The world watched as Nelson walked out of Victor Verster prison, hand in hand with his wife, Winnie Madikizela Mandela. The moment was filled with emotion and joy. People celebrated in the streets, singing and dancing to mark the end of an era of oppression. Nelson's release was a result of the tireless efforts of activists and the growing pressure on the South African government. It was a significant victory for the anti-apartheid movement and a testament to the power of perseverance and unity. Despite the long years of imprisonment, Nelson emerged with a message of peace and reconciliation. He knew that the path to freedom was not just about ending apartheid, but also about building a united and democratic South Africa. He called for negotiations between the government and the ANC to create a new future for the country. Nelson's release was the beginning of a series of negotiations to end apartheid. He played a key role in these discussions, working with then-President F.W. de Klerk and other leaders to dismantle the apartheid system. These negotiations were challenging, but Nelson's leadership and vision helped guide the process. During this time, Nelson traveled extensively, meeting with world leaders and garnering support for the transition to democracy. He spoke about the importance of unity and forgiveness, encouraging people to come together to build a better future. His message resonated with many, inspiring hope and optimism. Nelson Mandela's release from prison was a turning point in South Africa's history. It marked the beginning of the end of apartheid and the start of a new era of freedom and democracy. Nelson's commitment to peace and reconciliation played a crucial role in shaping the country's future. The transition to democracy in South Africa was a complex and challenging process. Nelson Mandela played a central role in guiding the country through this critical period. Following his release from prison, Nelson focused on building bridges between different communities. He knew that a peaceful transition required unity and cooperation. He worked tirelessly to promote dialogue and understanding between the various political, racial, and ethnic groups in South Africa. In 1991, Nelson became the president of the African National Congress, ANC. Under his leadership, the ANC continued to push for the end of apartheid and the establishment of a democratic government. Nelson's vision of a free and equal South Africa inspired many people to join the cause. One of the key milestones in the transition was the Convention for a Democratic South Africa, CODESA, which began in 1991. This convention brought together representatives from various political parties and organizations to negotiate the future of the country. Nelson was a key figure in these discussions, advocating for a peaceful and inclusive transition. The negotiations were not easy. There were many disagreements and moments of tension. However, Nelson's leadership and commitment to peace helped keep the process on track. He understood that compromise and collaboration were essential for building a united nation. In 1993, Nelson Mandela and President F.W. de Klerk were awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for their efforts to end apartheid and create a democratic South Africa. This recognition highlighted the importance of their work and the progress that had been made. The first multiracial elections in South Africa were held in April 1994. Millions of people, many of whom had never been allowed to vote before, participated in this historic event. The elections were a powerful symbol of change and hope for the future. Nelson Mandela and the ANC won a landslide victory in the elections. On May 10, 1994, Nelson was inaugurated as the first black president of South Africa. The inauguration was a moment of immense joy and pride for the country. People celebrated the end of apartheid and the beginning of a new era of freedom and democracy. The transition to democracy was a testament to Nelson Mandela's leadership and vision. His commitment to peace, unity, and reconciliation helped guide South Africa through a challenging period. His efforts laid the foundation for a democratic and inclusive nation. Nelson Mandela's presidency marked a new chapter for South Africa. As the country's first black president, he faced the daunting task of uniting a nation divided by decades of apartheid. His leadership and vision helped shape the future of the country. During his presidency, Nelson focused on reconciliation and nation-building. He focused on healing the wounds of the past and building a united nation. He emphasized the importance of forgiveness and worked to bridge the divides between different racial and ethnic groups. Nelson believed that reconciliation was key to creating a peaceful and prosperous South Africa. One of Nelson's major achievements as president was the establishment of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, TRC. The TRC was set up to investigate human rights abuses committed during the apartheid era. It provided a platform for victims to share their stories and for perpetrators to confess their crimes. The goal was to promote healing and understanding, rather than seeking revenge. Nelson also focused on improving the lives of South Africans. His government implemented policies to address poverty, inequality, and education. Programs were introduced to provide housing, healthcare, and access to clean water for all citizens. Nelson believed that everyone should have the opportunity to live a dignified life. Nelson's leadership extended beyond South Africa's borders. He became a global symbol of peace and justice. He traveled around the world, advocating for human rights and speaking out against oppression. His message of reconciliation and unity resonated with people everywhere. In 1999, after serving one term as president, Nelson Mandela stepped down from office. He believed in the importance of a smooth transition of power and wanted to ensure that democracy would thrive in South Africa. His decision to retire from politics set an example for future leaders. After leaving office, Nelson continued his work as a global advocate for peace and justice. He established the Nelson Mandela Foundation, which focused on promoting education, health, and social justice. He also worked on initiatives to combat HIV/AIDS, a major issue in South Africa. Nelson Mandela passed away on December 5, 2013, at the age of 95. His death was mourned by people around the world. Tributes poured in from leaders and ordinary citizens, all celebrating his extraordinary life and legacy. Nelson Mandela's legacy is one of courage, resilience, and compassion. He showed the world that it is possible to overcome great challenges through forgiveness and unity. His life teaches us the importance of standing up for justice and working towards a better future for all. Nelson Mandela's journey from prisoner to president is an inspiring story that reminds us of the power of determination and the importance of fighting for what is right. His example continues to inspire generations to work towards a more just and equitable world. Thank you for listening to this story. Remember, learning about great leaders like Nelson Mandela helps us understand the importance of kindness, justice, and perseverance. Keep exploring, stay curious, and always strive to make the world a better place.